Hi, welcome to this museum accreditation webinar. I'm Heather Lomas and I'm the accreditation advisor for the East Midlands and for the North East of England. And this webinar today is going to cover the organisational health section of the museum accreditation standard. You can download the slides that support this presentation, and you can pause the film as you go along if you'd like to do some of the activities that go with it. So to get us started, the objectives for this session then are to review the organisational health sections of the 2018 standard, to understand what Arts Council England is looking for in relation to your museum's organisational health, to spend some time considering key issues and areas, and to enable you to identify areas you need to address to support your accreditation return or your accreditation application. So once you've completed this session, you should be in a much better position to understand the things that you need to focus on to enable you to do that. Just to remind ourselves, this is the accreditation standard, and the standard is supported by the detailed accreditation guidance, which is available and provides all of the information that you need. These are both available on the Arts Council website. Just to remind ourselves, there are three key sections to museum accreditation, and today we're looking at organisational health, which is the first three areas within the standard. In total, it covers 9 areas, so apart from organisational health, it also covers managing collections and users and their experiences. Referring back to the accreditation guidance document, the guidance document is a single combined guidance document, so it covers all of the areas of the accreditation standard. It's really useful because it makes it absolutely clear what you need to do to meet the accreditation standard. It's clear how the expectations differ for the type and size of museum you are, and where the individual requirements are scaled, it will explain exactly what's needed for assessment. It's also really helpfully got the key assessment questions in there so that there are no surprises, you know exactly what Arts Council is looking for, and Arts Council will signpost other sources of help and guidance too, but all of the information and a complete suite of all the supporting documents is available on the Collections Trust website. Just one reminder about ensuring that you're looking at the right scale of information. Do remember to look at the indicators on the tables that start on page 11 of the accreditation guidance, which will help you decide on your museum's size and type. This ensures that your application is assessed proportionately, and as you go through the guidance documents, you'll see the different sections that relate to the different types of and size of museum that's listed there. So do that. Right, getting started then. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run through these 3 key areas for organisational health. So that's having appropriate governance and management, planning ahead and having the resources to deliver the plan, and assessing and managing the risk to the organisation. And I'm going to go through those in some detail with some exercises involved where appropriate to enable you to do those. So the first one is that museums have to show that they have appropriate governance and management. And within this section, there are 3 areas. So the first one is clear statement of purpose, followed by an appropriate constitution, and lastly by a satisfactory structure for your governance and management. So 1.1 is a clear statement of purpose. So the statement of purpose defines why the museum exists and who it's for, and it underpins all decision making and activity and should be clearly communicated and understood throughout your organisation and by your stakeholders and users. So everybody should absolutely understand what the museum's there for, what its absolute purpose is. Just some areas to focus on. You typically find your statement of purpose might be located in your governing document. So it would be there within the objects if you're a charity, for example. But it will also appear as a statement in your key policy and planning documents. And it's the thing that links everything back to each other. So that the key purpose is why you're there. And it's very important to provide those linkages. So that's your key purpose. And 1.2 is for museums having an appropriate constitution. So museums are long-term organisations. Their constitution needs to reflect that they exist for the public benefit, that they protect their assets, and that includes collections. Constitutions are really important to museums because they are legal documents which set out the organisation's intentions towards that long-term public benefit and the protection for collections. And your governing document must enable you to do this. It must be subject to statutory regulation or judicial process in relation to its conduct. So you might be a charity and registered with the Charity Commission, and you might be as well a company limited by guarantee. So you might also be registered with Companies House, or you might be a university museum and have that statutory regulation, or a local authority, for example. So one of the things that's quite useful at this point is to actually think about your governing document, going back to it and reviewing it, understanding when it was last reviewed. Is it still relevant and up to date? And has anything changed since your last accreditation return? And if anything has changed, then you'll need to update Arts Council about the changes and submit a copy of that with your accreditation return. Okay, 1.3 is demonstrating a satisfactory structure for your governance and management. So there needs to be a management structure in place which is appropriate to the size of your organisation, but outlines the appropriate authorities, the roles and responsibilities, so it's evident how formal decision making is made and where the accountability lies. Your museum also needs to have an appropriate workforce so that it can run effectively. So that might be staff and volunteers, it might be just staff, it might be just volunteers. But in any event, it has to have effective employment or volunteer policies, plans and procedures and roles in place to enable it to meet all of its responsibilities. So areas to focus on for this will be describing your management arrangements and providing an organisation or a workflow chart as part of your return or your application. Confirming who has authority to approve museum policies and plans, so that needs to be clear. If there's a separate organisation running the museum, then agreements between that organisation and the governing body must also be provided. And you'll be asked to confirm arrangements for the recruitment, induction, workforce development and succession planning throughout the organisation. And you'll also be asked to provide evidence of the volunteer agreements that you'll be using. So there are quite a few areas to focus on for that. And in addition to this, you'll need to be able to explain to Arts Council how you have access to professional advice. So museums have to have access to professional advice for input to policy development and decision making. So you need to think about how that's provided in the museum. Could be that you're employing staff who have the appropriate professional qualifications and experience, or it could be that particularly if you're a volunteer-run organisation, that you might need an accreditation mentor. I'm just going to give you a little bit of information about accreditation mentors. They provide professional advice to support the museum. Individuals are approved by Arts Council England, so there is an expression of interest form on the Arts Council website for people to complete. Professional experience must be demonstrated over 3 years at a curatorial or a managerial level across any of the 3 areas of the accreditation standard. So it could be an organisational health area, or a visitor services, users and their experiences area, or a collections area. So it's very broad. it acknowledges that museums cover a whole range of areas. Accreditation mentors must demonstrate a commitment to their own continuing professional development. If you have a museum professional who sits on your governing body as a voting member, then they could also, that could fulfill the requirement for an accreditation mentor. So there is an opportunity there if you've got somebody already involved with the organisation. Okay, section 2 then is planning ahead and having the resources to deliver your plan. And there are 2 sections here. There is 2.1, which is the forward or business plan, which covers, excuse me, the current and subsequent planning year. And then there's 2.2, which is about demonstrating financial sustainability. So I'm going to talk us through these 2 areas. The forward or business plan must enable you as a museum to plan effectively for the longer term and also demonstrate how you can adapt in a changing environment. So it should set out your key aims and objectives for the museum and how they're going to be delivered over a specific time and with a specific attached budget. And the forward plan should be proportionate to the size of your museum. So it should reflect exactly what the museum is there for and the size of it. So it's a useful time to start thinking about the museum's aims and objectives and thinking about where you want to be in the future and you know how the museum wants to develop within the plan. So spend some time thinking about that, but I've got some tools here that might help you along the way. So setting SMART aims. I'm sure lots of you have done this before, but SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, realistic and timely. And it's about having specific aims which are featured around these. We've put here some examples of things that you might think of doing, some aims you might consider. I'm sure you'll think of other ones too, but for example, we're going to develop our workforce. That's quite a broad aim, but within that, your objectives will be much more specific. They might be measurable and achievable and realistic and timely. So they need to fit within the resources you've got available to deliver your aims and the size of your museum. So you might want to spend some time now thinking about your own SMART aims and things that you want to focus on for the future. The forward plan or the business plan should include, as a minimum, a statement of purpose. So that links back to what we talked about at the very beginning. It needs to explain the period that the plan covers. So it has to be the current year and the subsequent year as a minimum. That's the minimum amount of time. The key aims that you want to achieve over the plan's duration, how you're going to achieve these aims, what you'll need to achieve these aims. So some information about resources. So that will be people, equipment, money, budgets for the current and subsequent planning year. So Arts Council can see that it's linked directly to it so that you've got budgets to support the activity and a review date. Other things to help within your forward on business plan to help the information come together is doing some analysis of your environment. So we would recommend that you do some internal analysis, so maybe completing a SWOT analysis. You might also want to conduct a PESTLE, for example, looking at external factors which might be impacting your museum. And you'll also need to look at data you've collected from consultation and feedback from your visitors and audiences. Once you've collected all these things together, they will really help you in focusing clearly on what your aims and objectives are and how you can deliver them. So the SWOT would look at your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities and threats. And I'm sure lots of you have done that before. And then the PESTLE would look at these 6 areas. So the political, economic, social, technological, legal and environmental factors which are impacting on the museum. It's a very useful tool to use, actually, because it really does make you think about where the museum sits within its wider environment. When you've completed your forward plan, you'll need to provide a copy of it and evidence of the signed approval from your governing body. So that will need to be submitted with your application to accreditation application or your return. Your statement of purpose and the key aims must be approved by the governing body or by those approved to take delegated decisions. But it's very likely that your actual specific delivery objectives and the budgets to support that may change within a year, and Arts Council do not need these elements to be formally approved. So the actual delivery end of all the different parts, if you like, that may enable you to have reached your aim, those we expect that those might well change. So that's the forward plan. It's an absolutely pivotal bit of the whole of accreditation because all the bits of the museum feed into it. So that's why we spent time on it. But let's move on and discuss financial sustainability. So the museum has to be resilient and sustainable, and you need to be able to demonstrate that the museum is financially sustainable and that you have the financial resources to deliver your forward and business plan. So you will be asked to submit budgets to support the forward plan, but it's also looking to see that you are this long-term organisation, that you are confirming that you're not unethically selling collections or using them as collateral. And it asks all museums to provide copies of accounts for the last 2 financial planning years. So income and expenditure for the museum must be clear, regardless of the size of the budget. So there needs to be some clarity there. And areas you might need to look at is how you actually allocate finances to specific objectives. So how do you actually make those decisions? Being able to demonstrate that the museum is not overly dependent on a single source of funding. This is important because it demonstrates sustainability for the future. And there also needs to be clarity that collections are not used as collateral or as a source of income through an ethical sale. So these are things you really need to be thinking about as you're going along. Okay, moving on to the third and final area then. There are 3 sections in this area of assessing and managing risk. So we'll be looking at secure occupancy of all premises containing collections. We'll be looking at a risk assessment of security arrangements, and lastly, a clear workable emergency plan. So the first area is 3.1, which is the secure occupancy of all premises containing collections. To ensure the long-term preservation of collections, museums have to demonstrate that their occupancy arrangements must be sufficient to keep objects displayed and stored collections secure, and allow for effective forward planning. And if your occupancy arrangements are for less than 12 months, you will be asked to outline a contingency plan to ensure the long-term protection of the collection. So you can still become an accredited museum, but you just need to think clearly about what would happen to the collections if you had to leave the current premises or you had to move out. Have you got a contingency plan about somewhere else that the collections could be stored, or have you got enough reserves, for example, to be able to pay for things to go into storage on a temporary basis? So it's about thinking through all of those issues about secure occupancy. 3.2 is about a risk assessment of security arrangements. And risk assessment in this area is a really important part of ensuring that the long-term preservation of collections and of the museum itself is considered. So you need to make sure that your risk assessment looks at threats to collections, but also people and buildings, and that you think about how you can address or mitigate some of these risks. Security arrangements have to be reviewed every 5 years, and you'll be asked to provide evidence that you've reviewed yours every 5 years. And ideally, museums should access expert security advice for this assessment. The advice needs to cover all aspects of the museum, collections, people, information, building security. If you can't access expert advice instantly, then you need to use the information and the template available on the Collections Trust website, which enables you to do a self-assessment exercise. And you then need to make sure that your plan of action is made to implement recommendations. And all of this would have to feed back into your forward planning exercise, because you probably need to ensure that you've got some resource there to enable you to implement your plan of action. 3.3 is ensuring that you have a clear, workable emergency plan. And you need to make sure that you have a plan that you've tested, that enables you to respond quickly and effectively to emergencies or disaster situations, that it protects people, collections information and buildings. And your emergency plan must be appropriate for the size of the museum and the collections. It must reflect a risk assessment of threats to the museum, and it must cover arrangements for everyone, so for workforce, for visitors, as well as your collections and the information on the collections. And museums must regularly update and test the emergency plan so that if an incident occurs, you can respond quickly and calmly. Areas to focus on is just making sure that the plan covers all of the relevant areas. So, as I said before, workforce, visitors, collections, and also the information that you hold on collections. That there's information there on how you authorise, maintain, communicate and test your plan, and how you make it available to the workforce and to the emergency services. So what steps have you got in place for all of that? And also information about how you test the plan and the date of the last review. So again, you just need to be clear about how that all works. It's much better to be prepared than be caught out with these things. Okay, well, that brings us to the end of the organisational health section of the accreditation standard. I've listed some resources here that might be useful, so please do look at these, which are on the associated PowerPoint that you can download. Please remember that accreditation advice and support is available via museum development teams, so please do contact your regional team for support. And also just to say that we have a series of these webinars available to cover all of the sections of the museum accreditation standards. So please do look at the other webinars to get information about the other areas as well. Thanks very much for watching, and good luck with your accreditation.